Hi there. So in this project, you're going to have to write a class that's going to implement a certain amount of functionality. So I'm purposefully not giving you a precise definition of what the class attributes and properties and methods should be. This is more of a word problem, and you're going to have to come up with a class and a design and maybe multiple classes that will help you achieve what we want to do here. So let's go through it very quickly. And you can download the notebook here and actually, read it in more detail. But we want to create an account, a bank account class. So accounts are going to be uniquely identified by an account number, but just assume that it will be passed into the initializer of the class. So you don't have to write code to generate account numbers. Just assume that one will be passed when the account is created. Now, furthermore, account holders will have a first and last name. And maybe you want to add something to the class that just returns the full name with maybe the concatenated first name and last name. But at the very least, they should have a first name and last name. So when we create an account, we should be basically specifying the account number and the account holder's first and last names. Now also, accounts will have a preferred time zone. We usually always deal with UTC times, dates and times, when we work internally. But when we display, let's say, a date to the user, we would want to know what is the time zone that they want to use. What's the UTC offset? That's really all we are going to worry about here is just an offset. And if you want, when you're working in production environments, you'll probably want to look at the PyTZ library. So we will have to set a preferred time zone as well. We also need balances. We need to maintain a balance on the account. And we want these accounts to only have, non-negative balances, so 0 or higher. And also the balances should not be directly modifiable. But we will have deposits and withdrawals that can be made. So we can deposit money and we can withdraw money. Okay? And those will, of course, change the balance. So that's how the balance is going to be modified, is through these kinds of transactions. There's also a monthly interest rate, and that monthly interest rate is going to be applicable to all the accounts uniformly. So everybody will have the same interest rate. You don't have to have different interest rates by account. It's the same for everyone. So we'll also need to add a method that will, given the interest rate, the current interest rate that's set, be able to add that, calculate the interest, and add it to the balance of the account. So this might be a method that might be called once a month to basically, calculate and add the interest to the balance. Now, furthermore, each deposit and withdrawal, and in fact also the interest deposit, right? So the deposit is a deposit that the user can make, or it's an interest-based deposit, has to generate a confirmation number. And the confirmation number should contain in it information like this: the transaction type, so D for deposit or W for withdrawal, and we'll identify an interest deposit separately. We'll use an I and maybe an X for a decline. For example, let's say that the user tries to withdraw more than what is available on the account, then it's going to get declined. And so we'll still generate a confirmation number, but that one is going to indicate that it was declined. We'll want to include the account number in the confirmation number. We'll want to include the time the transaction was attempted or made, and we'll use a UTC timestamp for that. We'll also want an incrementing number. So this is a number that's just going to keep incrementing. Every time a transaction is made, we're going to have a new transaction number. But that transaction number is not for the specific account. It's across all accounts. Now, for simplicity, just assume that the transaction ID starts at 0 whenever your program starts. Technically, you should probably go and read the last transaction ID from a database somewhere and so on. But we're going to keep it simple. Our transaction ID will just restart to the same number every time the program starts. And then that confirmation number should be returned from any of the transaction methods. We'll also want to create a method that, given a confirmation number, is going to break it up into its little components, like the account number, the transaction code, the date, time in UTC format, and maybe even a way to specify a local date time that we want to use, right? And then the transaction ID. And so make it so that it's a nicely structured object, so we can use dotted notation to access these attributes. So I purposely made it so that the desired time zone is passed as an argument to this method. That's what I would like to do. So we want to be able to call this method by passing it the confirmation code and also passing it a time zone that we want to use. Now you'll probably figure out why when I do that, and there's a reason for that, right? Because it won't require any data from the instance. So that's why I did that, and of course that means that you can do certain things to that method. So for example, let's say we have an account with this account number. We have a preferred time zone offset of -7 for MST and an existing balance of 100. Suppose the last transaction ID in the system was 123 and a deposit is made for 50 at this date and time, UTC. Now, the new balance should therefore reflect 150, and the confirmation number should now look something like this: a D for a deposit, this account number 140568 dash, and this is actually the UTC time. This is the year, the month, the day, the hour, the minutes, and the seconds. But I'm not putting it into an ISO format. I'm trying to make this confirmation number a little more compact. So you'll have to play with formatting. And then dash 124, which is the next transaction ID. Now we also want that method, remember, that I talked about, where you can pass in the confirmation code and a time zone, and it should return an object where we can access the account number, the transaction code, the transaction ID, the time given the preferred time zone that was passed into this method, and then the time in UTC. And you'll notice here that I made the time here a little bit more human readable, because we're probably going to present that to the user, and so we want that to be human readable, whereas here, which is these kind of more internal pieces of data, we can keep that in a strict ISO format. Now, furthermore, if the current interest, let's say, is 0.5, so 0.5%, and the account balance is 1,000, then the result of calling this deposit interest, or whatever method name you choose, should result in a new transaction, and the new balance now should be 1,050. So calling this method should also return the confirmation number with that I for the transaction code. Now, for simplicity here, just use floats everywhere, but be aware that for applications like this, we probably should be using decimal objects, not floats. So there's going to be many ways for you to design something like this, right? Because I didn't give you precise, instructions on what to do here. So you're going to have to come up with whatever classes you need, names for those classes, methods, properties, attributes. You're going to have to decide all that and maybe add a few more along the way as well to make it a better design. The other thing too is that you really need to test your code. Now, I'll talk about unit testing in the last video of this project. And you'll see that it actually is quite a bit of work to really be able to test your code. So my approach here, and this is just what I'm going to do, but of course you can design it however you want. But I'm going to end up creating two classes only. I'm going to have a time zone class that I'm going to use to store the time zone and the offset definition in hours and minutes. So basically it's going to be a time zone class that's going to have three properties. It's going to have a name, it's going to have an hour offset, and it's going to have a minute offset, right? And then from that, I'll be able to calculate an actual offset from UTC, so plus 11 hours and 30 minutes, or minus 11 hours and 30 minutes, or minus 7 hours. And then I'll assign it a name as well, whatever I want to call that time zone. So I'm not going to use standard time zones that you can get from PyTZ. And then I'll have a main class as well called account that will have the following public interface, but it may have a lot more private stuff going on. So it's going to have an initializer where I will pass it the account number, the first name, the last name, optionally the preferred time zone, otherwise I'll default it to just UTC, and also optionally a starting balance, which will default to 0. Then I will have a first name and last name property, and those will be read and write properties. People can change their names over the lifetime of their account. And then I will also have a computed property that will return the full name. Then I'll have a read-only property for the balance. I will have an interest rate property, but that's going to be a class level property. So you cannot use the @ property because those, remember, only create instance properties. Here, I'm going to create an interest rate That's going to be a class attribute. And then I will actually create two methods, two class methods called set interest and get interest. So I'm going to use kind of the more Java like approach of getters and setters because we haven't covered how to do class properties yet. Then I will have methods for deposit, withdraw, pay interest, whatever I want to call those methods. I'll have also a method to pass the confirmation code. So my classes will have additional state and methods, but those are the ones that I'm going to expose kind of in a public way. So that's my public interface. All right, so good luck with this project. And in the next series of videos, I will show you how I approached it and what I did. So it won't be perfect. I'm sure there's lots of things I'll be missing, and there's different ways that we can approach and solve this. Thanks, good luck.